He set the pen in my palm like a priest offering communion, his fingers warm against mine. It's not just money, Mom. It's belief in me, in us, in everything we've talked about since I was a kid. I signed away 4 decades of careful living while the office printer hummed like a warning I didn't hear. The documents looked so official with their corporate letterhead and legal jargon that made my head spin. He hugged me too tight afterward, and I smelled cold brew coffee and expensive cologne on his pressed shirt collar. When my banking app refreshed and flashed negative $312,000, my mouth went dry like old newspaper. I told myself this was love in action, that good mothers invest in their children's dreams no matter how scary it feels. His business plan had looked so professional during our dinner meetings, with those glossy color charts showing projected revenue streams and market penetration graphs that climbed steadily upward like a staircase to heaven. "You're going to be so proud of what we build together," he whispered against my shoulder, voice thick with emotion. Then his phone started going straight to voicemail the very next day, and my world began crumbling. 3 days of unread text messages, a full week of delivered, not seen status updates that mocked me from my phone screen. I stood at my kitchen sink every morning, rinsing the same coffee mug over and over, replaying his passionate pitch word for word like a broken record player. The professional website he'd show me during our family dinner now redirected to a generic "coming soon" page that never seemed to finish loading properly. I clicked refresh dozens of times, hoping it was just a temporary glitch with their web hosting service. I emailed the team contact address printed on his glossy business cards and got an automatic bounce-back message saying the account didn't exist. My chest felt hollow and echoing, like walking through the empty rooms after my husband's funeral 5 years ago when grief made everything feel unreal. I called the bank fraud hotline with trembling fingers, wrote down the reference number, and stopped just before pressing 1 to speak with an investigator. What if I was completely wrong about this? What if he was just overwhelmed with the exciting launch activities and investor meetings? But deep down in my stomach, something cold kept spreading like spilled ice water, and I knew the truth was much worse. I took a part-time job at the public library because the familiar quiet felt kinder than sitting alone in my empty living room, staring at the blank television screen and waiting for phone calls that never came. Teenagers wandered in asking for phone chargers and computer passwords while freelancers whispered urgently into their Bluetooth headsets about client deadlines and project deliverables. My small biweekly paycheck barely made a dent in the new credit card balance I'd been forced to rack up just buying basic groceries and paying utility bills. I learned to shelve thick computer programming manuals and business leadership books without letting myself think about him or wonder what he was doing with my money. That's where I first saw it, a glossy local business weekly magazine left abandoned on a reading table near the reference section. Someone had folded it open to page 12, and there was my son's familiar smile beaming out at me, announcing his exciting new technology company and his impressive executive title as founder and CEO. The article gushed about innovative disruption and venture capital backing, but there was no mention of me anywhere in the glowing profile. I accidentally tore the page while turning it with shaking hands, whispering to myself, "You didn't vanish into thin air. You just moved on to bigger things without me." The shame that had been weighing me down like wet concrete burned off like morning fog under bright sunlight, but the rage underneath stayed hot and sharply focused like a laser beam. I spent my lunch break at the library checking the state business registry database, methodically searching through corporate filings and legal documents. The official paperwork listed a managing partner I'd never heard of in my life, Miles Hargrove, plus a confusing stack of shell companies with similar names that had all been formed during the exact same week my retirement money mysteriously disappeared. At home that evening, I dusted off my old plastic file box from decades of managing school district grant applications and budget audits, then started a brand new tabbed 3-ring binder labeled Timeline in my neatest handwriting. I printed every single public record I could find online, organizing them chronologically with colored tabs and page protectors. Then one specific line buried deep in a corporate bank statement made my blood freeze solid in my veins. Initial capital investment, $312,000. the exact amount down to the penny from my retirement account that I'd worked 40 years to save. They hadn't even bothered trying to hide their theft from the official state filing documents that anyone could access online for free. I bought a simple greeting card from the drugstore and mailed it to his company's official business address. Happy first anniversary. Congratulations on turning my life savings into your personal legacy project. No angry threats, no emotional drama, just simple truth stated clearly in my careful cursive handwriting. 2 days later, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox from a no-reply, automated investor portal system, cordially inviting me to attend something called a Founders Night celebration at an upscale downtown venue. Had he accidentally put my name on the guest list out of old habit, or was this his twisted way of dealing with guilt and shame? I clicked the accept invitation button with the same steady hand that had signed away my entire financial future 6 months earlier. I pulled my best black blazer from the back of my bedroom closet, brushed off the lint, and spent hours in front of my bathroom mirror rehearsing one specific question over and over until the words felt smooth and natural. So tell me, how exactly is the burn rate looking on your investor funding? I wanted to watch his face very carefully when I asked that particular question in front of all his important business contacts and potential investors. Classical string music floated through the air, crystal champagne glasses caught the warm lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the city skyline at sunset. He worked the crowded room like a seasoned politician campaigning for higher office, an expensive champagne flute balanced perfectly in his manicured hand, his practiced laugh echoing too loud off the polished marble walls and making conversations pause momentarily. When he finally spotted me standing calmly near the registration table, that crystal glass froze halfway to his lips and his face went pale as computer paper. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely, like he was seeing a ghost from his past. "Congratulations on all your impressive success, sweetheart," I said with perfect calm, my voice carrying clearly across the reception area. "Tell me, how exactly is the burn rate looking on your investor funds these days?" The venture capitalists and angel investors gathered around us suddenly looked very interested, leaning in slightly to catch every word of our family conversation. He grabbed my elbow firmly and pulled me into a quieter side hallway, hissing under his breath, "You absolutely cannot be here talking like that in front of these people." I smiled genuinely for the first time in many months. "Well, I'm already here now, sweetheart. So, why don't you tell me? Who exactly is this Miles Hargrove person?" He said the name like it meant absolutely nothing important, just some old college buddy who's helping out with daily operations and administrative stuff. But the official state filing documents I'd researched clearly listed Miles as the managing member with full legal decision-making authority over all company finances and business operations. I politely excused myself to use the ladies' restroom and quickly took a discreet photo of the detailed organizational chart displayed prominently on a large easel near the lobby registration kiosk. The box, clearly labeled Chief Financial Officer, showed corporate initials that matched exactly with one of the suspicious shell companies I'd already flagged in my investigation, NA Industries, LLC. My heart hammered violently against my ribs as all the puzzle pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind like a combination lock opening. If my hard-earned retirement money had provided the crucial seed funding for their entire business launch, then legally they owed me significant equity ownership, or at absolute minimum, a very detailed and very public explanation in open court. I needed to find myself a lawyer who spoke fluent corporate fraud like their native language and wasn't afraid of taking on a real fight against well-funded opponents who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Beverly Reeves didn't look particularly impressed when I placed my thick evidence binder on her polished conference table. Instead, she looked genuinely relieved to see such organized and thorough documentation from a potential client. "You kept absolutely everything," she said approvingly, tapping my detailed timeline with the tip of her expensive pen. "You're definitely not the first parent who's been talked into funding a fantasy business venture. But this particular setup feels much more deliberately planned and calculated rather than just accidental family exploitation." She outlined 2 distinct legal paths we could pursue: criminal fraud complaints that would take many months to properly investigate and prosecute, or aggressive civil action that would move fast enough to freeze their bank accounts before they could move the money to offshore accounts beyond our reach. We'll need one absolutely crucial piece of evidence to make our case ironclad, she explained seriously, adjusting her reading glasses. We need absolute proof that your personal retirement funds went directly into their corporate business accounts with no legitimate business purpose. I confidently slid the detailed bank statement across her mahogany desk. She studied it carefully for several long minutes, then looked up at me with a smile that contained absolutely no warmth in her professional eyes. "Oh, we've got them," she said softly. "Official subpoenas served by certified mail with signature confirmation required. Registered corporate agent formally notified according to proper legal procedures." I learned the complex technical language of temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions like I was cramming for the most important final exam of my entire life. The judge carefully reviewed our evidence and granted a narrow but significant financial freeze. Their daily operating expenses and employee payroll could continue normally, but any large transfers to business entities controlled by Miles were immediately halted pending a full evidentiary hearing. My son's chief operating officer filed a dismissive response calling me an understandably emotional and distressed retiree who doesn't understand modern business practices. So I worked with Beverly to file a detailed counter-response supported by 43 numbered exhibits that systematically backed up every single one of our fraud claims. That night my phone finally rang after weeks of complete silence, and I saw his name on the caller ID for the first time since this nightmare began. "You're going to destroy everything I've worked so hard to build," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger and desperation. "I'm going to find out the complete truth about what you've done," I replied with steady determination. "If those two things turn out to be exactly the same, then that's definitely not my fault or responsibility." My former colleague from the school district, Pat Odell, still owed me a significant favor from years back when I'd helped him through his messy divorce proceedings. He cleaned and analyzed financial data for major consulting firms now and readily agreed to take a close look at all the documentation I'd carefully gathered. "These recurring expense reimbursements," he said, pointing at a clear pattern of repeating dollar amounts highlighted in yellow marker. "They're essentially money laundering through a fake vendor called Northbridge Atlas, which is actually just them systematically paying themselves for non-existent services." I felt the room start spinning slightly around me. He used his forensic accounting software to highlight a suspicious pattern of wire transfers that occurred every Friday at exactly 4:57 p.m., precisely 40 minutes before banks process their daily batch cutoffs for international transfers. "If we can time an emergency court filing perfectly," Beverly explained during our strategy meeting the next morning, "we can catch their next attempted transfer while it's still mid-flight and freeze it before it disappears forever." We circled next Friday's date on the calendar with bright red ink and began preparing our legal ambush. The feeling reminded me of planning surprise birthday parties, except the surprise would hopefully land someone in federal prison. We rushed to the courthouse at exactly 3:15 p.m. with our emergency motion paperwork in hand, every exhibit properly tabbed and organized according to court rules. The judge carefully reviewed our detailed grid mapping out suspicious transfer patterns, his jaw visibly tightening with each page as he realized the scope of the financial deception. At precisely 4:41 p.m., the court clerk stamped an expanded restraining order that immediately froze Northbridge Atlas and any materially related business entities or shell companies from conducting any financial transactions. I exhaled deeply for the first time in many weeks, feeling like I'd been holding my breath underwater. At exactly 5:02 p.m., my phone buzzed with an automated banking alert notification. Large wire transfer declined due to active legal hold. 10 minutes later, a text message arrived from an unknown phone number. "What exactly do you want from us to make this go away?" I carefully typed 3 words I'd been mentally practicing for days. "My life back." Then I thoughtfully added one more word that I knew would terrify them. "Publicly." I wanted everyone to know what they'd done to me, especially other vulnerable parents who might be targeted by similar schemes in the future. A well-dressed woman approached me outside the courthouse steps, her expensive coat collar turned up against the cold evening wind. "I'm Helena Pike," she said, offering me an embossed business card. Your son pitched our investment group just last month. Something about his whole presentation didn't smell quite right to those of us with experience. I carefully told her everything I legally could without violating the court's strict confidentiality order about ongoing litigation. She frowned deeply when I mentioned the parental funding situation and whispered, "He specifically told our entire investment committee that a sophisticated founder angel investor had provided all their initial financing for the startup. He never mentioned anything about family money or retirement accounts." She promised complete discretion and professional confidentiality, then asked for my permission to conduct some quiet investigation on her end using her extensive network of contacts in the venture capital community. "You probably won't like what I discover about their operation," she warned me seriously, checking to make sure nobody else was listening to our conversation. "But you'll definitely need solid evidence for your court case." I nodded grimly, mentally bracing myself for whatever additional bad news was still waiting to be uncovered. At this point, I doubted anything could shock me more than I'd already been shocked. Helena discreetly sent me a private link to exclusive photo albums from a launch party celebration in Seattle, professional headshots tagged with names, captions smugly celebrating their business success and future prospects. In one particularly damaging photograph, Miles held up a giant novelty check for $300,000 from NA Industries while my son raised a champagne toast directly behind him with a huge grin. The timestamp metadata matched exactly with the week when my retirement account had been completely emptied. I stared at my computer screen until the numbers blurred together and my eyes started watering. The photo caption read, "Built this incredible empire from absolutely nothing but pure determination and vision." I immediately printed the damaging image on high-quality photo paper and carefully taped it inside my evidence binder's front cover, where I would see it every day. I could feel my pulse throbbing hard in my temples like a drum beat. Our crucial court hearing was scheduled in exactly 5 days, and now I had devastating new ammunition that would be impossible for them to explain away. The photograph was timestamped, geotagged, and posted by Miles himself on his personal social media account. They had literally documented their own crime and celebrated it publicly. The courthouse courtroom smelled like fresh coffee from the bailiff's morning thermos and damp winter coats hanging on wooden benches. My son deliberately avoided making any eye contact with me, staring instead at his expensive leather portfolio or whispering urgently with his legal team. Their high-priced attorney stood up confidently and called me an understandably distressed and emotional retiree, while arguing that my money had been nothing more than a generous family gift with no strings attached. Beverly calmly opened a manila folder and slid Exhibit 22 onto the overhead projector for everyone to see clearly. A text message from him sent the night I'd wired the funds. "Founder's agreement gets signed Monday morning. I promise I'll make you so proud, Mom. This is going to change our whole family's future forever." The judge raised both eyebrows significantly and made notes on his legal pad. A generous gift? Or clear legal inducement to invest based on specific promises? Our presentation wasn't finished yet, though. Beverly had strategically saved the most damaging bank transfer alerts for the afternoon session when everyone in the courtroom would be paying close attention and the evidence would have maximum impact on the judge's decision-making process. We methodically presented the failed Friday transfer attempt, showing detailed bank records proving they'd tried moving substantial money to NA Industries just 3 hours after our first court injunction was officially served. The judge's facial expression hardened noticeably as he realized they'd attempted to violate his court order almost immediately. He extended the financial freeze indefinitely and ordered a complete forensic accounting of all company funds within exactly 10 business days. Outside on the courthouse steps, local business reporters waited with cameras and recording equipment ready. My son approached me directly, his eyes bright with barely controlled anger and desperation. "You did this to me completely on purpose to destroy my reputation." I felt strangely calm and centered for the first time in many months, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly but firmly. "You did this right beside me, hoping I would never notice the deception or be smart enough to figure it out." He leaned closer and hissed under his breath, "You won't survive what comes out during the discovery process." I smiled genuinely at him. I already survived the worst part of this whole experience. That was when you stopped answering my phone calls and treating me like I mattered. An anonymous Proton Mail account forwarded me a complete email thread between my son and Miles that made my hands shake uncontrollably while reading. Call it founder debt on the official books. Keep her name completely off the cap table. Optics matter tremendously for future investor rounds. The final line stung like a physical slap across my face. Parents are always sunk cost. Just smile, take their money, and move forward with a real business plan. I immediately forwarded the entire damaging thread to Beverly with the urgent subject line, "Founder's true intent, smoking gun evidence." She replied within minutes, "Print 3 copies immediately. Create multiple digital backups. Do not respond to the anonymous sender under any circumstances." I made photocopies and hid one complete set in my kitchen freezer behind the bag of frozen peas, just like my grandmother used to hide important documents during the Great Depression. 40 years of careful habits learned from managing school district finances were serving me incredibly well in this completely new kind of war. I felt like I was finally fighting back instead of just being a victim, and the feeling was surprisingly empowering despite everything. He suggested meeting at a small coffee shop near the old school district office where I used to conduct annual teacher performance evaluations and budget reviews. He talked rapidly and nervously about investor pressure, impossible timeline demands, and challenging market positioning requirements that I couldn't possibly understand. He kept saying we like I was somehow still part of his business plan and future success. "I can definitely arrange a reasonable repayment schedule that works for everyone involved," he offered, sliding a blank piece of paper across the small table without any actual dollar figures or timeline written down anywhere. I folded it neatly in half and handed it right back to him without looking at it. "This isn't about monthly installment payments," I said firmly, meeting his eyes directly. "This is about all the lies you told to build this entire fake life." His jaw muscles flexed and twitched noticeably. "Stories and feelings don't pay anyone's bills or keep businesses running." I stood up slowly, leaving my untouched coffee on the table. "My story is going to pay for justice, and that's worth more than money." I walked out while he was still sitting there, probably planning his next manipulation attempt. Helena called me from an echoing parking garage, her voice bouncing off concrete walls and metal beams. I managed to obtain a draft investor presentation from a junior graphic designer who freelances for their marketing agency, she said breathlessly, clearly excited about her discovery. Slide 7 lists all the founder equity percentages, and buried in a tiny footnote at the bottom is founder angel, Class B, non-voting shares. There's a specific dollar amount listed next to it that matches your wire transfer to the exact penny. Heat rushed up into my scalp like someone had dumped hot water over my head. They had created a completely fake share class specifically designed to erase my legal ownership rights while still counting my money as part of their legitimate business capitalization. This constitutes deliberate and systematic misrepresentation to investors, Beverly explained when I called her immediately. And it's going to sing beautifully in federal court. We dropped everything and worked through the night preparing an emergency motion to compel production of their complete capitalization table and all related investor documentation. The case was becoming bigger than just getting my money back. We were uncovering what looked like systematic investor fraud that could affect dozens of people. A message arrived from a company email address with no identifying signature or name. Check all the vendor payments to Blue Cedar Consulting. It's literally just Miles' sister getting paid for nothing. The attached invoices showed suspiciously neat, round numbers for completely vague strategy consulting services that were always billed on the exact same days as major investor deposits came in. Pat used his forensic software to cross-reference the business addresses. They were completely identical to NA Industries' corporate headquarters address. We immediately filed an urgent legal amendment naming Blue Cedar Consulting and requested the court add them to our comprehensive financial freeze order. At exactly 11:13 p.m. that same night, another anonymous reply arrived from the same mysterious company email account. "You didn't get any of this information from me. She's getting really scared too, and might be willing to cooperate. There were apparently many more internal cracks and fractures forming in their operation than I had originally realized. Someone inside was clearly getting nervous about potential criminal liability and prison time. The thought that there might be other victims gave me mixed feelings. I was glad to potentially help them, but horrified that more people had been hurt. Helena arranged to meet with Miles under the clever pretense of clarifying some due diligence questions for her investment group's potential funding decision. She wore a tiny digital recorder hidden inside a decorative lapel pin I'd purchased with accumulated grocery store reward points. On the crystal-clear recording, he bragged openly and arrogantly that their family angel investor had no legal paperwork whatsoever and therefore absolutely no ownership rights or claims against the company. He actually laughed out loud while describing my polite greeting card as pathetic and desperate. When I listened to the audio file later that evening, my cheeks burned with shame and anger the same way they had that first night when he looked me straight in the eyes and lied to my face in my own kitchen. "We don't necessarily need to pursue criminal fraud charges," Beverly said softly during our next strategy meeting. "We just need to shine bright public sunlight on all their illegal actions." The emergency sanctions hearing where we would present this devastating evidence was officially scheduled for Thursday morning. I could hardly sleep that night, knowing we finally had them trapped with their own words and their own arrogance. Justice was finally within reach after months of feeling helpless and stupid. We played this secretly recorded conversation for the judge through the courtroom's professional sound system. We displayed enlarged copies of the fake share classes on the overhead projector. We methodically mapped out the Friday transfer patterns, the family vendor payment schemes, and the completely dead website that had never contained any real business information. Their expensive corporate attorney objected so frequently and desperately that the judge finally held up his hand and said firmly, "Counsel, please sit down and be quiet." He read the transcript containing the phrase, "Parents are sunk cost" twice, much slower the second time through, his displeasure obvious to everyone in the courtroom. When he looked up again after several minutes of silence, his voice was completely level and controlled. "Temporary financial control of this company will immediately shift to a court-appointed monitor pending the outcome of a full trial on the merits." My son stood up so fast that his chair toppled backward and crashed loudly on the marble floor. I didn't move a single muscle or change my expression. A newspaper reporter's pen scratched urgently against paper like gentle rain on a window. Victory felt quieter and more profound than I had expected it would. That same afternoon, the company's automated investor portal system sent out a detailed statement drafted by the court-appointed financial monitor. It specifically named significant financial irregularities, related party vendor schemes, and completely unpapered founder financing arrangements that may constitute securities fraud. The portal access logs, turned over under the court's discovery order, revealed that my son had frantically tried to delete the entire investor contact list just 2 minutes before the statement went out to everyone, but the system had already processed the batch send. My phone immediately lit up like a Christmas tree with calls from unfamiliar numbers across the country. Some callers were furious at being deceived and wanted to join our lawsuit. Some were surprisingly kind and supportive, sharing their own similar experiences with investment fraud. One brief message from a young company employee simply read, "Thank you for having the courage to fight back." Right in the middle of everything, an email arrived from him with a subject line urgent. "You've completely ruined my entire life. Are you finally happy now?" I typed and deleted 12 different angry replies, then decided silence was more powerful than any words I could write. His attorney offered a settlement amount that would have completely restored my original retirement account balance if I hadn't already spent many months paying substantial legal fees and selling my grandmother's antique jewelry that I'd planned to leave my granddaughter someday. Beverly slid the settlement offer back across the polished conference table without any hesitation. "Triple damages plus a full public apology or a permanent equity block in the company," she said calmly, adjusting her reading glasses. "Pick one option and we can end this today." I could see in his desperate eyes that he wanted to choose the apology route and cut his losses, but stubborn pride made his mouth say, "We're definitely going to trial." I felt oddly weightless and free, like I was floating above the whole situation. This had stopped being an emotional tug-of-war the exact moment I'd stopped pulling back and started pushing forward. I wanted the final verdict officially entered on the permanent public record where anyone could find it. Future victims would be able to research his name and discover exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. That felt more valuable than money. The courtroom windows framed a pale winter morning sky filled with gray clouds. 12 jurors took their assigned seats with the quiet solemnity of church ushers preparing for a funeral service. The foreperson stood up slowly and cleared her throat. We find the defendants liable on all counts of misrepresentation and conversion. Punitive damages are awarded in the amount of $936,000. Constructive trust is imposed over all founding business entities pending full asset recovery. The specific numbers blurred together in my overwhelmed mind. The judge's wooden gavel striking his bench didn't. I closed my eyes and pictured my old kitchen table covered with carefully organized grocery store coupons fanned out like tiny paper sails, remembering when my biggest financial worry was whether to use the 50-cent detergent coupon or save it for next week's sale. Reporters crowded around me in the busy hallway afterward, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "What will you do with the settlement money?" one young woman asked breathlessly. I surprised myself by laughing out loud with genuine joy for the first time in over a year. "I'm going to help other people avoid going through what I went through." I replaced my entire retirement savings account and then added substantial extra money for long-term security and peace of mind. I established a comprehensive scholarship fund in my late husband's memory specifically for first-generation college students in our district who learn to manage family finances before they learn to manage their own independent futures. The court-appointed monitor released a detailed final report that now appears as required reading in a business ethics course syllabus at the prestigious college my son used to brag about attending. He sent one final message to my email account, just 3 words with no punctuation marks. "I hate you." I read it once, deleted it immediately without responding, then turned off my phone completely and walked into the library for my regular afternoon volunteer shift. A teenage girl approached the reference desk and asked where she could find books about entrepreneurship and starting a business. "Aisle 12, I said with a genuine smile, pointing toward the business section. "But start with the chapter about integrity. Everything else is just details." She thanked me politely and walked away with purpose in her step. I watched her go and felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, hope for the future and pride in my own strength.